First thing we're going to do to prep this window is we're going to put a sill receiver on. Well, so what happens is we nail this on, and then our windowsill is going to snap right into it. So I've already pre-cut it to size, and we're going to nail it on the opening. Now, where this doesn't have nail slots in it, what you should do is angle your nail slightly out. That way there you won't get too much rippling in here. Not that it's really going to affect anything, but I just don't like ripples, so I aim my nail out just a little bit so it carries the slack out. Next thing we're going to do is put our sill into the receiver. I've already pre-cut this. Again, you want to be, for a colonial casing, you want to be 10.5 inches larger than your opening. So we've cut this. Once we cut it to length, we do our notch backs, which is 1.1/16 inches off the edge, off this edge, and 1.25 inches in off this edge, both upper and bottom. So it's all slotted and made ready to put your end caps on after you're installed. So what we're doing is we're basically lining up our slotted cut even with the edge of our receiver. So next we're going to dry fit the end cap into the sill for positioning. But what we have to do first is slot out this part of the end cap because it's going to hit the receiver right there. So I'll take my razor knife, slice down into it there, and on the back side. Then I just take that part out. So now when we put it in, what you do is pull down on the sill slightly and pop it right in like that. So that looks good. So we'll set the same thing up on the other side, cut down into the end cap there, and all I'm basically doing is rocking this back and forth while my knife is slitting through. All right, and that's all set. Okay, next thing we're going to do is glue this in. Now this glue, when it gets cold, gets really hard to squeeze. So what I suggest is on a cold day, you take and put this up on your defroster and heat it up a little bit. Once it's heated up, it flows nice and smooth like peanut butter. Draw down on the bottom, stretching the sill out so it's easier to fit it in. Pop your end cap in, press it into position. That'll dry fairly quick. Set up the other side. Slide it in, get your top in position. Let go. Now any glue that squishes out, don't worry, let it dry. You can cut that right off with your razor knife later. Now that we got both end caps in and glued, we're going to set the bottom so that we're holding that end cap tight. Now the end caps have nail holes in them, but I don't recommend you use them. Sometimes when they're more there for a guide for your J-channel to fit over later on. You can nail them if you want, but sometimes when you nail them, you'll twist them and cock them out so that the edges are showing. So I recommend just gluing them and let them sit there till they're dry. Next thing we're going to put on is the Mullion receiver. This actually serves 3 different purposes. So for this purpose, we're using it next to the window to accept our casing face. So to prep that, I've already cut it to length. I'm a little bit over on the top so I can trim it down later. If I were to put this on right now the way it is, you get a slight space on the bottom. So to alleviate that space on the bottom, I'm going to back cut the nailing flange just a little bit so that the front face of this hits first. So I back cut this area here and this area right here. So now when we put it in, you'll see that the face of this is actually sitting down on top of the sill. You see no space. So now we're ready to nail it off on the bottom. Now what I have here is very little nailing room. I prefer to have my nail on the flat piece of wood so it doesn't concave this at all. Let's see how this will do. Right like that. Now what I'm going to do is set up this other side so that they're both ready to go. Now before I finish nailing this off, what I have to do is mark the top of the window on this back side of the mullion receiver. Now we'll mark the other side, top of the window. All right, once I have both cut, I pull them down and I'll actually cut through the back side of this right to my mark. Then I cut down the front edge, or I should say the inside edge, leaving the face alone. Now once that's done, we do the same thing to the other side. Again, cut through your back side. Now these are ready to nail off. Now we're ready for our top piece. I'm marking this top edge on here so I can back cut this on both sides. Make a square line right across. The only thing that's important is this outside edge. What I'm actually going to do is angle this down in that direction there so that I don't get any interference from material in this area here. And then we'll do the same thing to the other side. Again, the only part that's important is that outside edge, because that's where we're mitering to. That's if you choose to miter it. Next thing we do, we take our top piece, overlay it, and mark the opening, inside opening of our window. That's where we know where to bring our miter points to. All right, so we'll mark this side. Now we got both sides marked. I'm going to wait and cut this later, just in case this should have to move a little bit. Same technique I used to cut the sides to cut the top. I'm going to cut right to that mark I put on the top. And then I'm going to cut this area out here. Now what I can do is just cut a straight line to that outside corner, just like that. I also want to cut this back out of this locking lip. Take my razor knife, shove that in, and just pry it out a little bit so I can get my snippers in there. I cut this at a really big angle so that once I lay it over this part of the lip is not going to shove it out so that you're going to see a gap. So I'll do the same thing to the other side. Again, by keeping your hand close to where you're cutting, that helps you control how your cut comes out. the further away your hand is from supporting it, the more flex you're going to have on the product, and it's going to be harder to make a nice cut. So now this side's all cut. Put that in the position it's supposed to be in, if I get my hands to work. So what I did is I put the right side in position where it's supposed to be, and I just put a tack in to hold it so I can use both hands to mark my outside edge here. I put my square on, draw my line down. So that tells me now I got to miter this from here to this corner. So I pull out my little tack and then cut it. Get my snippers lined up right on that line. Cut it there. Again, pry this open. Make a long angle cut, getting all that out of the way. Now we're going to fasten it. So now we're going to install the top piece. I've already got my hole lined up where I tacked it for my first cut. So I just put that right back where it was, nail it in. Come over the right side, nail it off. Left side, get it in position, nail it off. All right, so the next thing we do is we prep our casing faces for each side and the top. Now your casing face has this 3/4 and 3/8 hook on it. We can't use that here because we're going into a mullion receiver, so we're going to cut this right off using our razor knife. Now we've trimmed this down, we've trimmed the edge off here, so now we have a flat piece of casing face. Stick it right into the receiver. Make sure you're all the way in. Slide it down to the sill. Nail it off. So when I'm going over a rough surface like this, I nail on all the high points so it won't waffle in and out. All right, I'm not going to nail the top yet because I'm going to have to trim this back a little bit. Now we're going to put the other side in. Nail it off the same way. So now we're going to set up the top of this. Now, because this window dead ends into the soffit, we have to use a little different application. We have to use a standalone receiver. Now, we have to mount this flat, so in order to put the standalone receiver on, we have to cut this flange out. This edge would go into a slot that we create on a regular house that we're not doing siding on, that we want to use a standalone casing on. But for this application, we're up against a soffit, so we need this to sit flat. So we're going to cut this flange right off. Now we have a nice flat piece. All right, so now we put it up here in position. We have to mark about 3/8 to a half an inch off this lock. You can see my pencil mark right here. Drag that cut all the way up so that we only have about 1/4 of an inch between the edge of the top lock, and drag it out this way. So now we're going to cut that right out. All right, so cutting this with your snippers, when you cut through this, you'll generally get distortion and stuff in this lock. So it's your cut comes out a lot better if you use a saw. So just come over with your chop saw. The only part that's really important is to get your cut through that lock. Once you've made that cut, the rest is easy to do with your snippers. Just cut along, leaving about 1/4 inch or so up against the lock. Go the other side. Do the same thing. So now we're just about ready to install. What I'm going to do is draw a line here to get this casing face out of the way so this can lay flat. And I'll just use my snippers to cut it down. Put it where it's got to be. Nail it off. Now you'll notice I didn't drive my nails in all the way yet. The reason being is there's a rise in the lock in the top and there's a rise in the lock in the bottom. It makes it hard for the head of your hammer to get in there. So you can either use a screw if you want, or once you get the nail most of the way in, just use a nail set to finish driving it in. So now this is installed. I'm going to cut a flat piece of vinyl out of a piece of casing face to fit in this area here. I'm going to leave, probably 1/4 of an inch of up and down expansion and contraction. I'm going to be 1/4 inch under the lock on this side and 1/4 of an inch under the lock on this side. That's for expansion and contraction so that the product never slides out and you see a hole. So now that I got it cut, I'm going to slide this in. Now we're in and done with this part of it. Finished nailing off my casing face. Now we're ready for moldings and J-channel. In one of our tips and tricks, I showed you how to do speed cuts, how to pre-cut an angle in the bottom using a 9-degree angle on your chop saw so you don't have to scribe the bottom. So I've already pre-cut these at a 9-degree angle on the bottom so I can just slide them in and go. Now we're ready to install the moldings and J-channel. So I take my J-channel, snap it into the molding, and we're ready to go. Same as when you're scribing by hand, I got to make a little cut on the back side of this at an angle to clear out the lock, both here and on the J-channel side. Now we're going to install the molding in J-channel, just like that. We're down nice and tight. Looks good. Nail it off. Now you can see we got a little space up top. We want that. That's going to carry it right through there. And do the same thing to the other side. So we're going to put our standalone molding on here. That way there we're up, it'll help us finish up against the soffit. So we put it up here. We're going to mark our inside miter points, which is basically this edge right here. Mark our other side. Take our template, bring it up to our mark, and draw our template line. There's one. Again, slide up to our mark. And again, I can't say this enough. A nice sharp pencil makes a nice crystal clear line, makes it easier to cut. Now we're all cut out for there. The only thing we got to cut now is our length. Now what I'm doing is holding this on my mark, and I'm marking up where the standalone receiver is out back to cut the lock off the back. So now that I got my marks there, that tells me where my receiver ends. So I can just cut that right out of there. The same thing on the other side. Now it's time to lock it in and install. So what I want to do is get this point underneath this lock here, which is kind of tight. All right, I got that in. Now we got to get this side in. What I'm going to do is bow it a little bit. And I want to shove my putty knife underneath this edge. That's going to help lift the molding off and create a space for me to get that lock into. Just like that. So now I got both sides underneath the lock. I bring it up from one side to the other until she's in position. Now she's locked in there. I want to get it locked into the receiver. So I line it up on one side and just push. And you can hear it lock as it goes. Did you hear that snap? Now she's locked in. To trim out the edge, take your snipper, just run it right along this edge, and that'll act as a guide. Now you'll see a little gap here. That won't be here after we put the siding in. It's going to flex this molding out, so that'll close that gap. So I just pull it out a little bit till I'm flush, run my snippers right along that edge. So that gives us a nice clean edge.